Where does real power lie in corporate America? In a shiny keycard, a prestigious title, or the loudest voice in the boardroom? When my boss publicly stripped me of everything to cover his own incompetence, he thought he was eliminating a threat. But when a door locks from the outside, sometimes the one left inside is the actual prey. Pour a glass of bourbon, and let me tell you how arrogant ignorance dug its own grave. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. We want to sincerely thank you for your incredible support over the years. But unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely no budget to continue operations. Because of this, we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will transition our efforts entirely over to Patreon. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to exclusive, real-life revenge stories that are even better, significantly longer, and packed with intricate details we simply cannot make public on YouTube, all brought to life by a full cast of emotional voice actors in the same story. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us dive right into today's story, told from the perspective of our protagonist, Sophia Turner. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Aerodyne Defense Solutions in downtown Seattle was usually maintained at a crisp 68 degrees, but today, the air felt suffocatingly heavy. I stood at the head of the 20-foot mahogany table, the soft hum of the ceiling projector acting as the only white noise in a room completely paralyzed by tension. As the senior safety inspection engineer, it was my job to find the catastrophic flaws that no one else wanted to acknowledge. On the giant screen behind me, slowly rotated a three-dimensional rendering of the next-generation jet turbine prototype, a government project worth billions of dollars and countless human lives. I was halfway through detailing a critical structural vulnerability when the heavy oak doors violently swung open. Marcus Vance, the vice president of operations, strode into the room like he owned the very oxygen we were breathing. He smelled of aged scotch, expensive mints, and an unyielding desperation to push the launch forward. The third quarter earnings call was exactly 2 weeks away, and Aerodyne's stock price needed a miraculous surge. Marcus fully intended to serve the shareholders that miracle on a silver platter, regardless of the safety metrics or the lives at stake. "We have heard enough of this nonsense," Marcus barked, his voice slicing through the quiet room like a serrated blade. He did not bother to sit down. Instead, he paced slowly behind the row of seated board members and human resources executives, aggressively tapping his knuckles against the back of their expensive leather chairs. None of them dared to make eye contact with me. They stared intensely at their digital notepads, suddenly fascinated by the blank screens. The cowardly silence of the crowd was palpable, almost thick enough to taste. It was a masterclass in corporate survival. You do not look at the person facing the firing squad, and you pray the executioner does not turn his gaze toward you. "I am not finished with the risk assessment." "Marcus," I replied, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "The heat tolerance on the primary turbine casing drops by 14% under maximum thrust when sustained for over 45 minutes. If this prototype goes to the testing phase at the Nevada military facility without a complete structural recalibration, we are looking at a guaranteed catastrophic failure." Marcus stopped pacing. A cruel, predatory smile stretched across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He leaned heavily over the table, placing his palms flat against the polished wood. "The only catastrophic failure in this entire company is you. You have spent the last 6 months finding ghosts in the machine, deliberately delaying a project that is already 3 months behind schedule and costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars in overrun expenses. You are not a safety engineer. You are a paranoid anchor dragging down Aerodyne's stock value." He straightened his tailored suit jacket, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling, dead emptiness. "Effective immediately. You are terminated from Aerodyne Defense Solutions." The official grounds are deliberately obstructing project progress and flagrant violation of internal protocols. The collective intake of breath from the human resources representatives echoed loudly in the silent room. Firing a senior engineer mid-presentation was not just a simple dismissal. It was a brutal public execution, specifically designed to send a terrifying message to anyone else in the company who dared to prioritize safety regulations over profit margins. "Call security," Marcus snapped at the human resources director, who nearly dropped her phone as she scrambled to dial the number. Within 60 seconds, two burly security guards in dark suits stepped into the boardroom, their expressions entirely stoic. "Strip her access," Marcus commanded, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. "I want her physical keycard. I want her corporate tablet. And I want her network accounts locked down right this second. Do it right here. Do it right now." One of the guards approached me, holding out a large plastic security bin. I did not flinch. I slowly unclipped the silver Aerodyne keycard from my lapel and dropped it into the bin. It made a hollow, plastic clatter that sounded deafening in the quiet room. I handed over my company tablet next. My phone vibrated intensely in my pocket, a silent notification that my corporate email and highly classified server access had just been wiped clean by the IT department. "Marcus, before you blindly finalize this," I said, my tone eerily calm and devoid of anger, "you need to understand the structural hierarchy of the clearance codes. There is a federal licensing loophole regarding this specific Department of Defense contract. If I am removed without a proper transitional handover protocol—" "Save your pathetic excuses," Marcus interrupted, letting out a loud, mocking laugh that bounced off the glass walls. "A federal loophole? Are you actually trying to use imaginary government red tape to save whatever little dignity you have left? We have an entire floor of lawyers who cost us thousands of dollars an hour. We absolutely do not need a washed-up, disgruntled engineer giving us legal advice on her way out the door." He walked swiftly around the large table and deliberately invaded my personal space. His eyes darted to the breast pocket of my blazer. With a sudden, aggressive motion, he reached out and snatched the silver smart pen clipped to my pocket. It was not just an ordinary pen. It was the heavily encrypted biometric signature tool issued directly by the Federal Oversight Committee, the physical and legal manifestation of my safety approval authority. He held it up to the harsh fluorescent lights, twisting it between his fingers with a look of absolute, arrogant triumph. "I will be taking this. As of this exact second, you no longer have the authority to sign for a cup of coffee in this building, let alone a classified defense contract. Gentlemen," he said, turning his attention to the security guards, "escort her out of the building immediately. If she resists in any way, call the police." I did not resist. I did not utter a single word of argument. I simply adjusted my blazer, smoothed out the fabric, and picked up my personal leather bag from the floor. As I turned toward the heavy oak doors to make my exit, I allowed my eyes to drift toward the massive presentation screen one last time. While everyone in the room was entirely focused on the theatrical drama of my humiliation, not a single one of them noticed the small, blinking red error code that had just materialized in the bottom right corner of the master dashboard. The central system had already registered the abrupt, unauthorized termination of my credentials. The failsafe was officially armed. I walked out of the boardroom in complete silence, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, leaving them locked in a glass cage with a ticking bomb they did not even know how to defuse. The drive home was a blur of gray Seattle drizzle, but stepping into my apartment felt like entering a vacuum. The absolute silence was a stark, jarring contrast to the venomous energy and the suffocating tension of the boardroom I had just left. I did not turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I walked straight to the kitchen, poured myself a tall glass of ice water, and stood by the window for a long moment. I let the cold water soothe the lingering adrenaline in my throat while watching the rain hit the glass. I was completely stripped of my corporate identity, yet I had never felt more in control. I carried the glass to my small dining table and pulled out my old, heavy personal laptop. It was a bulky machine from 5 years ago, deliberately kept entirely separate from anything related to the Aerodyne corporate network. I booted it up and navigated directly to a heavily encrypted intranet address. It was the government portal exclusively designated for independent federal inspectors. This was my direct tether to the Department of Defense Oversight Committee, a secure digital fortress that Marcus Vance, with all his vice presidential authority and arrogance, did not even know existed, let alone have the clearance to access. I entered my secure credentials, the screen glowing a dim blue in the darkened room, waiting for the inevitable fallout. My cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden table, shattering the quiet. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. She was a brilliant 23-year-old junior engineer who had been working directly under my supervision for the past 8 months. I let it ring twice before picking up, giving her a moment to collect herself. Sophia. Oh my God. They are completely losing their minds over here. Chloe breathed out, her voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated panic. I could hear the frantic shouting and the chaotic clatter of keyboards in the background. The transport bay was apparently in full, catastrophic meltdown. Take a deep breath, Chloe, I said, my voice intentionally soft and steady, an anchor for her to hold on to. Tell me exactly what is happening down there. The transport trucks are loaded and sitting in the yard, but the automated dispatch system is totally locked down, she explained, speaking so fast her words nearly bled together. The logistics software will not release the security gates to ship the turbine prototype to the military facility in Nevada. It is throwing a massive red flag, demanding a Level 1 safety identifier. Marcus is screaming at the transport manager, demanding to know why the shipment is halted. The drivers are just sitting in their cabs, completely terrified. I took a slow sip of my water. I knew exactly why the gates would not open. The Level 1 identifier was not a simple password you could reset with an email link. It was a highly classified cryptographic handshake between Aerodyne and the Pentagon. It required a dual authentication biometric lock, needing both my physical fingerprint on that stolen smart pen and my active encryption certificate on the network. The very same network account Marcus had just ordered human resources to terminate. What is Marcus doing right now? I asked, leaning back in my chair. He is totally unhinged, Chloe whispered, her voice dropping as if she were hiding behind a server rack. He just dragged the entire IT department down to the loading bay. He is aggressively ordering the lead systems architect to bypass the security wall, to crack the code, or to somehow spoof the identifier. He told them they have to get those trucks out of the yard before 5 o'clock this afternoon, or he is going to fire every single person in the department and ruin their careers. The desperation was entirely predictable. Marcus had confidently promised the shareholders a milestone delivery today. His fragile ego and his desperation to inflate the stock price would not allow him to miss the deadline, even if it meant attempting to hack a military-grade security firewall. Listen to me very carefully, Chloe, I instructed, my tone shifting from comforting to absolute command. Do not touch a single keyboard. Do not offer any suggestions to the IT team. Do not attempt to help them troubleshoot the logistics software. You step back, you blend into the concrete walls, and you keep your hands entirely clean. But what if Marcus directly asks me to fix it? She asked, the raw fear evident in her shaky breath. He knows I was your assistant. He knows I worked on the release protocols. If he corners you, I replied evenly, you look him dead in the eye and tell him the truth. You tell him the logistics system strictly requires the highest level of executive access. And since he fired the only person in the building with that clearance, he will have to figure it out himself. Protect yourself. Chloe, let him dig his own grave. Okay, I understand, she said, her breathing finally slowing down a fraction. I have to go. He is heading back toward the engineering bullpen, and he looks furious. The line went dead. I set the phone face down on the table and turned my full attention back to the glowing screen of my old laptop. The Federal Inspector dashboard had just automatically refreshed. Right in the center of the screen, a bright crimson alert box had materialized, illuminating the dark room. The system had detected a brute force hacking attempt originating directly from the Aerodyne internal servers, aimed squarely at a federally protected defense protocol. Beneath the flashing warning, a digital timer had already begun to count down. It was the mandatory federal response window for an unauthorized access breach on a military contract. I did not need to do a single thing, make a single call, or type a single line of code. I just sat in the quiet dark of my apartment, watching the seconds tick away, knowing with absolute certainty that every desperate keystroke Marcus ordered was pulling the noose tighter around his own neck. The internal legal department at Aerodyne Defense Solutions was a fortress of risk mitigation. They did not deal in hypotheticals. They did not care about stock prices. They dealt strictly in federal statutes and compliance mandates. Exactly 30 minutes after the logistics system locked down the transport bay, the lead corporate counsel sent a priority red-flagged memorandum directly to Marcus Vance. The subject line was written entirely in capital letters. It was a stark, unambiguous warning. Shipping classified defense technology, without the verified cryptographic signature of the designated safety representative, was not merely a breach of a corporate contract. It was a direct, indefensible violation of federal law. The memorandum clearly outlined the consequences. It carried massive financial penalties. It carried the immediate suspension of all government contracts. Most importantly, it carried potential federal prison time for the acting executive. Marcus did not care. He could not afford to care. He had made a blood oath to the major institutional investors. The third quarter earnings call loomed over him like a heavy, sharpened guillotine. He needed the stock price to jump at least 15% by the end of the month. He needed the prototype on those trucks, heading down the highway, before the sun set. Retreat was simply not an option. Admitting defeat to a fired engineer was completely out of the question. He summoned the head of legal and the director of human resources into a glass-walled conference room overlooking the busy production floor. He did not invite discussion. He did not ask for legal counsel. He demanded absolute submission. "You are a room full of cowards," Marcus spat. He aggressively threw the printed legal memorandum across the large mahogany table, the white papers scattered over the polished surface like dead leaves. "I do not pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to tell me what I cannot do. I pay you to pave the road so I can do it. The investors are waiting. Wall Street is watching closely. We are shipping those turbines today. I do not care what imaginary red tape you have to cut." The lead counsel adjusted his glasses. He was visibly sweating, his face pale against his dark suit. "Marcus, the law is completely rigid here. There is no gray area. The Department of Defense strictly requires a Level 1 identifier to release this specific payload. You just fired the only person in the entire building who holds that specific federal clearance. If those trucks cross the state line without the proper authorization protocol, we are looking at federal fraud. We cannot protect you from the government." "Then I will authorize it myself," Marcus snapped. His voice was loud, echoing off the glass walls. "You cannot do that," the lawyer pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "Your executive credentials do not override a federal safety mandate. It is a completely different jurisdiction." Marcus slammed his closed fist onto the table. The heavy glass rattled violently. "I am the vice president of operations. I run this facility. I make the rules. Get human resources in here right now. Draft an executive override document. I will formally assume the safety representative title myself. I will absorb all the liability. Just get me a piece of paper that forces that stubborn system to open those damn gates." The legal team stared at him in utter disbelief. They were witnessing a man happily pouring gasoline over his own career and striking a match. But Marcus was the boss. His authority was absolute. Fear won the battle over common sense. The human resources director frantically opened her laptop. Her fingers shook as she began typing the override protocol, effectively drafting his legal death warrant. Down in the cavernous logistics bay, Chloe stood silently near a massive stack of wooden shipping crates. She watched the chaos unfold with wide eyes. She remembered my exact instructions. Stay quiet, blend in, watch him dig the grave. Do not offer a single word of help. 10 minutes later, Marcus stormed down onto the cold concrete floor of the transport bay. He was flanked by the trembling human resources director, who held a heavy digital clipboard tight to her chest. The transport manager and the paralyzed IT staff immediately stepped back, giving Marcus a wide, terrified berth. "Bring up the final release authorization," Marcus barked at the transport manager. The manager nervously tapped the main console. The large screen flashed bright red, stubbornly demanding the missing override signature. Marcus snatched the digital clipboard from the hands of the Human Resources Director. He reached confidently into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out the silver smart pen. It was my smart pen. He handled it like a victorious king wielding a stolen scepter, completely blind to the danger it held. Chloe subtly shifted her position behind the crates. She slid her cell phone out of her pocket. She kept it low, expertly hiding it behind a thick logistics binder she was holding against her side. Marcus aggressively jammed the smart pen against the glowing screen of the digital clipboard. The pen required a biometric match to validate any high-level signature. Marcus did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. He pressed his own right thumb firmly against the biometric sensor on the side of the stolen pen, forcing his own executive override code through the system. He scrawled his messy signature across the digital line with a flourish. A soft, barely audible click echoed from Chloe's phone. She had captured the exact, damning moment. The high-resolution photograph perfectly framed the entire scene. It showed Marcus, his arrogant sneer, the stolen silver pen in his grip, his thumb pressed hard against the biometric scanner, and the federal override document glowing brightly on the screen. It was undeniable, irrefutable proof of a federal crime in progress. The logistics terminal let out a sharp beep. The system accepted the override, temporarily forced into compliance by the sheer brute force of executive privilege. A loud, heavy mechanical groan echoed through the massive warehouse. The thick steel security gates began to slowly roll upward. Bright afternoon daylight flooded the dusty loading bay. The heavy diesel engines of the transport trucks roared to life, echoing off the concrete walls. Marcus stood victorious in the dead center of the bay, his hands resting on his hips. He smiled a wide, predatory smile, watching the massive trucks roll out onto the open highway. He truly believed he had won. He believed he had brilliantly outsmarted the system, crushed a rebellious employee, and saved the quarter for his precious investors. He was so incredibly proud of his decisive action that he immediately pulled out his personal phone and drafted a company-wide email. He sent it to all 3,000 employees currently on the Aerodyne payroll. Back in the absolute silence of my apartment, my old laptop chimed softly. I had set up a secure, anonymous forwarder from the corporate server weeks ago, a small precaution for a rainy day. Just like this, I opened the new message. The subject line read, "A new era of efficiency for Aerodyne." The body of the email was absolutely dripping with toxic corporate arrogance. Marcus proudly announced the successful deployment of the next-generation turbine prototype. He arrogantly congratulated the operations team on meeting the tight deadline, despite internal challenges. Then came the final paragraph, a thinly veiled, malicious victory lap. He wrote extensively about streamlining operations and finally excising the obstructive tumors that had been holding their visionary progress back. He was bragging to the entire world. He was gleefully documenting his own federal crime in front of thousands of witnesses. I read the email twice, soaking in every arrogant word. A cold, faint smile crept across my face in the dim light of the room. I slowly moved my mouse, clicked the print button, and securely saved a digital copy to my encrypted hard drive. Marcus Vance had just signed a federally mandated safety document using a stolen cryptographic device. He had applied his own unauthorized biometric data to a secure government channel. He had forced a restricted military shipment onto the open road. And then, in a stroke of pure, unadulterated hubris, he had sent a written confession to the entire company. The heavy steel jaws of the trap had not just snapped shut, they had completely shattered his bones. Exactly 48 hours after Marcus forced those heavy steel gates open, the transport convoy pulled up to the heavily fortified checkpoint of the military testing facility, deep in the Nevada desert. It was 110 degrees outside, but the real heat was about to drop on Seattle. The United States military does not care about corporate bravado, internal politics, or quarterly stock prices. They rely on cold, hard, unyielding code. When the civilian transport manager scanned the digital manifest at the primary security gate, the automated military defense network did not simply reject the shipment. It immediately triggered a catastrophic red alert. Harsh sirens blared across the desert compound. Flashing red lights illuminated the dusty windshields of the trucks. Heavily armed military police swarmed the vehicles within seconds, aiming their weapons and ordering the terrified drivers to step out with their hands raised. The payload was flagged not just as an unverified delivery, but as a shipment compromised by a hostile internal security breach. Within minutes, the automated alert reached Washington, landing directly on the secure desk of Julian Hayes. Julian was a senior representative for the Military Oversight Committee, a man who possessed absolutely zero sense of humor when it came to matters of national security. He immediately pulled the encrypted digital log from the logistics server to see exactly what had triggered the massive lockdown. What he saw made his blood run completely cold. The highly classified Level 1 safety identifier, a safeguard meant to prevent catastrophic weapons failures, had been aggressively overwritten. An unauthorized biometric signature was forced into a federally protected channel. Julian did not send a polite inquiry. He did not ask for a meeting. He issued an immediate, devastating subpoena directly to the executive board of Aerodyne Defense Solutions, demanding a full explanation for what amounted to corporate treason. The subpoena hit Marcus Vance's inbox at exactly 9 a.m. on the third day. He was sitting in his pristine corner office, admiring the sweeping view of the Seattle skyline, completely oblivious to the tidal wave rushing toward him. He opened the email. The blood instantly drained from his face. The official, terrifying seal of the Department of Defense stared back at him from the screen. As he read the brutal legal language of the mandate, the horrifying reality of his situation finally snapped into focus. The executive override document he had angrily demanded from Human Resources was not just an internal piece of paper to cover his tracks with the company board. The internal corporate software was deeply and inextricably integrated into the logistics network. The exact moment he pressed his thumb to my stolen smart pen, the system had automatically transmitted that override document directly into the permanent archives of the Department of Defense. He had not just bypassed a warehouse gate. He had personally submitted a digitally signed confession of national security fraud directly to the United States military. The panic set in. It was a visceral, suffocating panic. Marcus realized he was standing on a trapdoor, and the federal government had just pulled the lever. My cell phone, sitting quietly on my kitchen counter, began to ring. It rang continuously. By noon, I had received 27 separate voicemails. I sat at my table, drinking herbal tea, and listened to them one by one, tracing the rapid, pathetic deterioration of his mental state. The first few messages were full of his usual toxic bluster. "Sophia, you deliberately left a bug in the system before you left," his voice barked through the speaker. "Get back here right now and fix this glitch, or I will personally sue you into bankruptcy." By the 15th message, the arrogant wall had severely cracked. His breathing was heavy, his tone erratic. "Sophia, please pick up the phone. The government is asking questions about the release forms. We need to get our stories straight before this gets out of hand." The final voicemail, left just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, was nothing but a breathless, desperate plea from a completely broken man. "Sophia, I am begging you. Just come into the office for 1 hour. Name your price. I will double your old salary. Just fix the clearance code. Please, just pick up the phone." I did not answer a single call. I did not type a single text. Instead, I put on my coat, grabbed an umbrella, and walked down the street to a small, quiet coffee shop tucked away on a side street. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a corner booth opposite my private attorney. He was an older, sharply dressed man who had spent 3 decades navigating complex federal employment law. I slid my phone across the table, letting him listen to the frantic audio recordings. And then I showed him the printed copy of the arrogant, company-wide email Marcus had sent bragging about removing me. My lawyer listened to the chaotic voicemails, read the printed email carefully, and let out a slow, deeply satisfied sigh. He took a sip of his coffee and looked at me with a calm, knowing expression. "You are going to do absolutely nothing, Sophia," he instructed, his voice low and incredibly steady. "You are not going to sue them for wrongful termination. You are not going to return any of these phone calls. You will not send a single message. Marcus Vance has handed you a loaded weapon, pointed it directly at his own chest, and pulled the trigger. If you intervene now, you might accidentally give his legal team a defense. You must let his own arrogance finish the job. He just turned himself into a federal criminal. Let the government do the heavy lifting." Back at the Aerodyne headquarters, the illusion of power was disintegrating at a terrifying speed. The Military Oversight Committee did not just wait patiently for an answer to their subpoena. They took immediate, crippling action to neutralize the threat. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the accounting department tried to process the weekly vendor payments. Every single transaction was violently rejected by the system. A few minutes later, the chief financial officer received a terrifying automated notification from their primary banking institution. The federal government had enacted an emergency freeze on all corporate financial assets. Every single Aerodyne bank account was locked tight. Pending a full federal investigation, they could not pay their massive list of suppliers. They could not process payroll for their thousands of employees. They could not even buy a box of staples. True. Unadulterated panic swept through the glass corridors of the corporate headquarters. The mighty empire Marcus Vance had tried to build on a foundation of lies, intimidation, and shortcuts was rapidly crumbling to dust, completely suffocating under the crushing weight of federal authority. The emergency virtual hearing was convened at exactly 8 o'clock the following morning. There was no polite small talk. There was no corporate banter. The massive digital monitor in the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor illuminated, displaying the austere, wood-paneled office of Julian Hayes. As the senior director of the Military Oversight Committee, Julian possessed a presence that could freeze the blood in your veins through a monitor. Seated around the polished mahogany table in Seattle were the chief executive officer of Aerodyne, the entire panicked board of directors, the lead corporate counsel, and Marcus Vance. Marcus looked like a hollow shell of the man he had been just days prior. His designer suit hung loosely on his frame. His face was pale and slick with cold sweat, and his hands trembled violently as he gripped the edge of the table. Julian leaned forward, his hands folded neatly on his desk. He did not blink. "We are not here to negotiate," Julian stated, his voice a low, gravelly hum that demanded absolute silence. "We are here to formally dissect an unprecedented breach of national security protocols. Aerodyne Defense Solutions has transmitted a falsified security override to the Department of Defense, forcefully dispatching an unverified turbine prototype to a restricted military testing facility. Before I read the formal sanctions, I have invited an independent federal compliance advisor to join this call to verify the technical timeline of this disaster." A secondary video box materialized on the massive boardroom monitor. The screen flickered for a brief second before my live feed stabilized. I was sitting at my small dining table in my apartment, wearing a sharp, tailored black blazer, my hair pulled back perfectly. I looked calm, rested, and entirely in control. A collective, audible gasp echoed through the Seattle boardroom. The chief executive officer's jaw practically hit the polished wood table. The lead counsel instinctively leaned back in his heavy leather chair, violently adjusting his glasses as if he could not believe his own eyes. Marcus Vance, however, reacted as if he had just been struck by a high-voltage electrical current. He violently shoved his chair backward, scraping the legs loudly across the hardwood floor. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen, his face flushing a furious, desperate shade of crimson. "Her!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking under the immense strain of his panic. "She is the one who did this. She is a disgruntled former employee. I fired her earlier this week for incompetence, and she deliberately planted a malicious bug in the logistics network on her way out. She sabotaged the transport bay. She locked the gates to ruin the quarterly shipment and exact some sick, twisted revenge against this company. She hacked into the system and framed me. The room fell dead silent. Everyone stared at the screen, waiting for my defense. They expected a shouting match. They expected me to frantically defend my reputation against a vice president in front of a government official. I did not raise my voice. I did not frown. I simply looked directly into the camera lens and offered a small, polite smile. "Mr. Hayes," I said, my tone as smooth and cold as glass, "would you kindly permit me to share my screen with the boardroom?" "Permission granted, Ms. Turner," Julian replied, not taking his intense, calculating gaze off Marcus. I moved my mouse and clicked a single button. My live video feed was instantly replaced by a crystal-clear, high-definition image of a digital document. It was not a complicated system log or a dense string of code that Marcus could try to dismiss as confusing technical jargon. It was the exact executive override form that the Human Resources Director had desperately drafted down in the transport bay. Right there, in the center of the massive boardroom screen, was the undeniable truth. The document clearly detailed the forced bypassing of the Level 1 safety identifier. At the bottom of the page, written in stark black digital ink, was the personal signature of Marcus Vance. Directly next to his signature was a high-resolution scan of a biometric fingerprint. "As you can clearly see on the authenticated federal log," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly steady and professional. "This is not a system glitch or a malicious hack. This is a direct, manual override. The system registered the use of my federally issued cryptographic smart pen. However, the biometric sensor on that pen recorded a physical fingerprint that did not match my profile in any way. The system instantly flagged the mismatch, but the block was forcefully bypassed by executive authority." I clicked to the next slide. It was a blown-up, side-by-side comparison of the fingerprint recorded on the federal document and the official corporate fingerprint Marcus used to access the executive elevator every single morning. It was a flawless, 100% match. "Furthermore," I continued, seamlessly delivering the final, devastating blow, "this document was not just signed and kept internally. It was actively transmitted to the Department of Defense archives the very second the transport warehouse gates were opened." Marcus was hyperventilating now. He looked wildly around the room, making panicked eye contact with the board members, silently begging them to intervene, to protect him, to use their immense corporate power to crush me. "It was an emergency," Marcus stammered, heavy sweat pouring down his forehead. "The legal department told me we had to get it done. They advised me to find a temporary workaround to satisfy the institutional investors." The lead corporate counsel did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He threw Marcus under the bus with a speed and ferocity that was almost breathtaking to witness. He slammed both of his hands down on the table and glared at Marcus with pure venom. "That is an absolute, verifiable lie," the lead lawyer barked, his voice echoing loudly in the tense room. He turned toward the camera, speaking directly to Julian Hayes. "For the official record, the legal department of Aerodyne Defense Solutions explicitly and formally warned Marcus Vance against taking this action. I personally sent him a priority memorandum outlining the catastrophic legal consequences of bypassing the safety identifier. We have the internal system timestamps. We have the read receipts. We even have sworn testimonies from the Human Resources Director and the Transport Manager, both of whom were severely threatened with termination if they did not comply with his insane demands. Marcus Vance acted entirely as a rogue agent, completely ignoring our written legal counsel in a desperate, illegal bid to force the shipment through." Marcus collapsed back into his chair. He buried his face in his trembling hands. He had no allies left in the room. His corporate authority was completely gone. His intimidation tactics were utterly useless. He was entirely cornered by the undeniable evidence he had created with his own arrogant hands. Julian Hayes let the silence stretch for several long, agonizing seconds before he finally spoke again. His voice dropped an octave, carrying the full, crushing weight of the United States federal government. "The evidence is completely irrefutable," Julian declared, his face entirely devoid of sympathy. "Aerodyne Defense Solutions is officially in severe violation of a classified military contract, effective immediately. The Department of Defense is levying a penalty fine of $50 million against this corporation. All current and future government contracts are suspended entirely, pending a complete, top-to-bottom structural audit of your facilities. The chief executive officer buried his head in his hands, groaning audibly as millions of dollars of stock value instantly evaporated into thin air, realizing his entire empire was on the brink of total collapse. As for you, Mr. Vance, Julian continued, narrowing his eyes at the broken, weeping man slouched at the mahogany table. You have committed a remarkably grave offense, forging a federal safety document and utilizing stolen cryptographic hardware to bypass military security is not a simple corporate mistake. It is a felony. This meeting is now officially concluded. I suggest you stay exactly where you are. Marcus, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has already been dispatched to your headquarters in Seattle. They walked through your front lobby exactly 3 minutes ago. They are currently riding the elevator up to the 42nd floor, and they have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open once more. I watched through the high-definition camera feed as the exact same two burly security guards in dark suits stepped into the room. Just days ago, they had stood over me, demanding my security badge and my company tablet under Marcus's arrogant, barking orders. Today, their expressions were just as cold and stoic, but their target had completely changed. They walked straight past the trembling board members and approached Marcus. He did not fight them. He did not scream. The fight had been entirely drained out of him. He simply let them haul him to his feet like a lifeless rag doll. They aggressively stripped him of his executive keycard, confiscated his company phone, and frog-marched him out of the boardroom to wait for the federal agents gathering in the downstairs lobby. His entire legacy, his wealth, and his freedom evaporated in the span of a single morning. With Marcus gone, the chief executive officer of Aerodyne turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes toward the camera. He leaned so close to the microphone that I could hear his ragged, panicked breathing. "Sophia, please," the chief executive officer begged, his voice stripped of all corporate pride and ego. "We desperately need you back here. We will give you your old position, but we will multiply your original salary by 3. We will give you a signing bonus of $2 million right now. We will make you an executive vice president. You will have absolute, unlimited authority over every single engineering and safety division in this company. Just come back and help us fix this relationship with the military. We can void the termination paperwork. We can pretend none of this ever happened." I sat back in my dining chair and let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked at the panicked billionaire on my monitor, feeling nothing but a profound sense of peace. "I politely decline your incredibly generous offer," I said, my voice carrying the light, airy tone of someone who had just dropped a massive, suffocating weight. "And you cannot void my termination. The paperwork was processed, signed, and legally finalized by your own Human Resources Department the exact moment I was escorted off the property. And that, gentlemen, brings me to the absolute best part of this entire situation." I paused, letting the silence hang heavily over the panicked executives. Aerodyne enforces one of the most brutal, restrictive non-compete clauses in the entire aerospace industry, I explained calmly. If I had simply quit my job, I would have been legally barred from working for any competitor or government agency for 5 entire years. I would have been completely trapped, forced to change careers entirely. But because Marcus chose to publicly and hostilely terminate my employment without cause, that non-compete clause was instantly and permanently nullified under state labor laws. You did not just fire me, you legally set me free. Before the chief executive officer could utter another desperate, pleading word, Julian Hayes cleared his throat loudly, drawing all the attention back to his authoritative presence on the secondary screen. "Aerodyne Defense Solutions no longer has a say in Ms. Turner's employment," Julian stated flatly, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "In fact, the Department of Defense has already drafted a new, highly classified contract, effective immediately. The military is hiring Sophia directly as our new Director of Independent Inspection. She will not just be overseeing your facility in Seattle, she will be the supreme authority monitoring your entire nationwide network of suppliers. She answers only to the federal government. If you ever want to see another military contract for as long as your company exists, you will be answering directly to her. The chief executive officer slumped back in his heavy leather chair, utterly and completely defeated. I reached out and pressed the button to end the video transmission. The screen went completely black, plunging my dining room back into its peaceful, quiet state. My cell phone buzzed gently on the wooden table. It was a text message from Chloe. I opened it and read the words glowing brightly on the small screen. "They are packing up his office into cardboard boxes," Chloe wrote. "You are an absolute legend down here." I closed my heavy laptop and let out a long, deep breath. I picked up my coffee mug and walked out onto my small balcony. The cool Seattle wind brushed against my face, and the city hummed with vibrant life far below me. I looked out over the towering glass skyscrapers, feeling a profound sense of clarity. The absolute sweetest revenge is not aggressively destroying your enemies. The sweetest revenge is stepping aside, letting their own blind arrogance do the heavy lifting, and watching them happily hand you the keys to the highest tower. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and listening to this journey today. We truly appreciate your time, and we would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please let us know down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's story, please remember that YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, meaning we have zero budget to keep operating here. We will be forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform very soon and will be transitioning entirely to Patreon. We humbly ask for your help. Please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you can listen to the absolute best, most detailed, and exclusive real-life revenge stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we hope to see you there.